Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you know about something that is so exciting that we have on the forefront. We will soon be releasing a course called Brand Belief, which is all about how to build a brand that you and your clients believe in. This goes far beyond just selecting a logo and a few colors to go with it. This is an intuitive journey about your customers' needs, their desires, their values, and how you can make their lives easier through the services that you provide. This is about how you can be of service in this world through a brand that has both longevity and legacy attached to it. We couldn't be more excited to bring this to the forefront so that people can take advantage and learn the skills, the knowledge, and everything that they need to do to tie together their business's message, their mission, and actually effectively communicate that to the world. So we couldn't be more excited. We will leave a link in the description to be able to enable people to sign up for the waitlist, and then we'll let you know as soon as the course launches. If you have questions, feel free to send those on as well. And this is for more than photographers. This is for creatives as a whole. This is for individuals who maybe even have a brand that's established, but they want to rebrand, or maybe a business that didn't establish themselves as a brand and now they would like to do that. This is equally for people who have a fantastic business idea, but they don't know how to communicate that through an effective brand. So click the link in the description. That will tell you a bit more information, and it will allow you to sign up so that you can be notified when this course is launching. Now we hope you enjoy the episode. Hi everyone, Ariana here from Well-Fed Photography, and I am joined by the lovely Sarah Sproule. And I am delighted to have her on today because she covers very important topics with the work that she does. Areas like speaking to parents about how they can connect their children when it comes to conversations around puberty, their changing bodies, sex, consent, all of those really, really important areas that sometimes we feel a bit awkward discussing. So Sarah, I'm so delighted to have you on. Can you tell us a bit about who you are as a person first before we jump into what you do professionally?
Sure, yeah. So I'm an Australian living in Ireland. I've been here 20 years. So most of my parenting, in fact, all my parenting has been done here. I'm a mum to 3 teens now. My eldest is 17, a daughter, and I have 2 boys, 15 and 13. I share the house with my 2 dogs, my spouse, and another member of our chosen family, Kelly. So we have a busy inner city Dublin situation going on here, and it keeps me busy, but I think really that I thrive on chaos. Thank goodness, because my family is a little bit chaotic.
Can you tell us about the evolution, like what brought you to the work that you're doing now?
So when I was growing up, my parents were missionaries, and they were both brought up in very conservative church families. So they were taught to be good. And what that meant was they weren't taught how to work out who they actually were and how to speak up for themselves. And in the same way that they were taught that, they also raised us like that. And that was fine. It was a very loving home. But what I discovered as I was getting into my teen years and definitely into my 20s is that I didn't understand about my body. I didn't understand how to speak up for what I needed. I didn't know what sort of relationships I wanted. I didn't have an orgasm till I was with a partner until I was 28. So it was sort of a lot of those things that I didn't want for my children. So when my kids were very young, I started to have conversations about what I thought was age appropriate and what sex was and where babies come from and what condoms do, and steadily realized that not everyone wasn't doing the same thing as I was doing. And that meant that there was conflict, particularly with some other families at school. And it was one of those situations where you sort of, when you're at a crossroads and you're like, I was like, I know this is important, but I know it inside myself. I don't have the research or the understanding of why it's important. So I went over to DCU actually here in Dublin and did my master's in sexuality studies, which tied in really well with my occupational therapy background. I've been an OT for over 20 years. And that was sort of the vision for me, was to help parents not have to go through that same thing I went through, which was know in their heart that this is the right thing, but constantly being challenged by parents who didn't think it was the right thing and feeling like, oh, maybe I'm not doing this right. And it's not fair for those of us in parenting, and particularly if we're doing something revolutionary and maybe pushing back against the norm, that we don't have the support and the encouragement to do that, because it takes effort, doesn't it, to do things that are slightly different to what everyone else is doing.
Yes, absolutely. I find that, especially as parents, sometimes we can default to what has been modeled to us, but even that might not necessarily align with what our values actually are. So sometimes we have to take a step back and evaluate how we can shift from just defaulting to what's been modeled and make different choices. And I love some of the things that you've spoken about on your Instagram, which we'll get to later as well, but just about how some things that we're doing might be countercultural, but it's really important. And so I know that you talk about these massively important areas. What are some of the most common questions that parents ask you?
One of the most common things would be, what age should I be talking about? And then insert a topic here. So like, what age should I be talking to my kid about how babies are made? If they're asking me the question, is it all right to answer? What happens if I've got an older child in the car with me and they ask a question and there's someone in the back? So there is a lot around age. And then there's a lot of questions which I sort of consider, is my kid normal questions? So like, my child is humping the couch or touching their vulva or their penis before they go to sleep. Is that okay? Another one of my children is touching her brother's penis in the bath. Is that okay? So all these is that okay questions, because one of the universals in parenting is that we want our child to have a really comfortable time growing up, and we absolutely want to avoid shaming them. And at the same time, we want to make sure that, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't feel quite right to me. So those are the common questions. And what's lovely about them is they're focused very much on doing the best that a parent can for their growing child, whether that's making sure they don't get into trouble or avoiding the shame that a lot of us would have got growing up. And that's what the questions warm my heart. They're so beautiful.
And actually, what do you tell parents when they are asking around age and when to start having these conversations?
It's so interesting that that's the most common question about age, because the reality of it is our child's sexuality, in fact, our sexuality as well, our sexual selves, the part of ourselves that are sexual, is there inside all of us from, even before we're born. And it's part of what makes us human, and it develops over time, just like our child's ability to speak or walk or write or read or play football or whatever it is. Their sexual self is along those same lines. So it makes sense that we are having conversations or using words or teaching, boundaries from the very beginning. And while our child may not sort of be able to speak, we can be doing the groundwork to make sure we are in a comfortable place, in the best place possible, so that when they are starting to ask us questions, we know what we're about.
And so how would parents start laying the groundwork or building those foundations for when the questions come or when the conversation arises? What can they be doing now?
Well, newborn, I sort of remember when I brought Alice home, she was a cesarean birth. So she came home from the rotunda, and I still remember putting her into the car seat thinking like, oh, this is so scary. We have to drive with her in the car, through town traffic. And why is anyone letting this baby come home with us? Don't they realize we have no idea what we're doing, right? But when she got home, it was like, okay, so I'm getting used to bathing her and changing her nappy. So when it came to changing the nappy, it was like, wow, I'm responsible for someone else's genitals, right? And what am I going to call these genitals? Because when I was brought up, anything to do with our genitals or our bottom or anything like that was called the alls, ALLS. I don't know why, but that's what it was called. So it was like, make sure you wash your alls, you do your alls, this and that, the other. And so the first thing we can be doing is challenging ourselves to say, okay, so do I want to accept the culture that I was raised in and do that same thing and use euphemisms or pet names? Or can I start practicing with, this is your vulva, and I'm just going to change your nappy here, and I'm going to clean your vulva and make sure everything stays healthy, and putting your nappy back on, and practice words like that. Oh, let's just wipe your scrotum there. I can see it's still a little bit dirty, and yes, that's your penis. And so while it could be thought of that we're saying those words for the sake of our newborn, we're actually not. We're saying them for ourselves to get used to it and start to sort of unpack or chip away the stigma that might surround some of those terms.
I agree wholeheartedly, and we've done very similar things. We've chosen to use actual terms like penis or vagina because we felt it was important to have those things be neutral. And our thoughts about it were, if we think of pet names or use pet names, it's almost this undercurrent of shame or embarrassment. So we wanted our children to be empowered to use the appropriate terms. And I have to say, it's great. I have a 4-year-old son, and he will say, oh, I need to wipe my penis. And it's so nice that he can just say that. And it's neutral, and it's just a body part, as if he was speaking about his arm or his leg. And it's the nicest thing in the world. And I'm so happy that we ended up taking that path. I'm wondering for you, for someone who maybe didn't start out that way, maybe they started with the names that were not anatomical names, and they want to move in that direction. What would you say to them?
You haven't done anything wrong. That's the first thing to say. Like, you did the best with the information you had at the time, so it's fine. And now you know something different. So it's great to be able to go to our child and let them know that we've learned something new. Because oftentimes children are under the impression that adults, they know everything and they do everything right, which is obviously not true. And I think when we sort of can challenge that culture, it brings us more connection with our child, sort of at eye level. You know, that same thing about getting down at eye level and talking to your child. Well, telling them we've learned something new is that same sort of thing as getting down and being at eye level. So you can say, you know, I was listening to a podcast, and did you know what I didn't know? That kids can learn about the really good scientific names for their private parts, or whatever the words you've been using in your family. And I didn't know that. I am so glad I discovered that. So let's talk about the words. And I'm using that. I'm imagining in my hand that the person who's having that conversation has a 4-year-old, sort of like where they're like, oh, everything's very interesting. And you might decide to, let's draw a picture of these things and we'll write the word underneath, right? And put it on the fridge, just to bring the words into everyday life. So in the same way they might have drawn a picture at preschool or whatever about, well, the spring sunshine and the blossoms. Then we say, well, the next thing we're learning this week is that this is a penis and this is a vulva. And I suppose as a step before that, not everyone is going to feel comfortable using these words. And so it's a matter of finding podcasts like this, for example, and maybe listening to this podcast on repeat for every time you get in the car to go to the supermarket, because our nervous system needs reprogramming. Our nervous system is designed to keep us safe. And we have probably picked up along the way that saying words like penis and vulva and clitoris and sex is dangerous, because when we were very small, the adults around us possibly didn't say these words. And so we got this sense of something's not right here. Or maybe if we did say the word and we asked what they were, we might have been told you don't need to know that, or shh, we don't talk about that, or whatever it is. And so we have a very deep-seated, inbuilt system that is telling us these words are dangerous, don't say them. And so the kindness that we need to show ourselves, because this is not about like pushing through, like, I'm going to say it and it doesn't matter how hard it is. No, we're going like, wow, yeah, I've got, some things inside me that make this really hard. And it might take me a few weeks of listening to people say these words, or following a few different accounts on Instagram or whatever it is, just to start getting our nervous system used to having these words in our vocabulary, seeing them written on Instagram stories or whatever it is. And so there's a sense of gentleness, very, very gently and softly.
I love that. And equally for, I love that you equated children and just human beings in general experiencing sexuality on, they're learning and they're developing it along the way, just as they would their speech. So when it comes to children exploring their bodies, what is your approach to that? Because obviously that starts very young for many children. They're exploring, they're seeing what feels good to them. What's your approach to this?
Yeah, it's like anything else. It's part of their body. It's part of their body. So they get to do things with it. Like anything else, we teach them the boundaries around things. So just like we teach our kids table manners. I remember when my kids were still young, and we were teaching them how to use their spoon. Like, it wasn't even a knife and fork. It was just a spoon. Like, you use your spoon to eat your peas, use your spoon to eat your peas. Don't throw food on the floor. Don't put spaghetti in your sister's hair, like over and over and over and over again. Well, in the same way that as our children, they touch their body, particularly once they're out of nappies or after a bath, they might be running around naked and sitting on the couch and playing with their penis or their vulva or whatever. We can say, that is a wonderful part of your body, and it's just for you. And in our house, the rules are that you can play with that part of your body or touch that part of your body in the bathroom or in your bedroom, right? No shame, no stigma. It's just the same as we use our spoon to eat our tea. We touch our penis or our vulva in our bedroom or in the bathroom. It's exactly the same thing. And while our nervous system will tell us it's different and that it's scary and wrong to say these things, it's not scary or wrong. It's just another boundary that we're putting in place for our household. And we're teaching them the rules around it. Because just like, this is for you, not for anyone else, and this is where you do that.
I think that's so crucially important, because as a parent, I don't want my children to be disconnected from their bodies. I want them to explore and enjoy their bodies. But I think, like you said, it's great to be able to set boundaries around what maybe is acceptable in certain situations and where they can enjoy their body or explore their body, so that they know there's a safe space for them to do that. And there are other places where maybe it's less appropriate. So that's a fantastic approach. I am wondering, we were speaking about languaging and taking shame out of things. Are there other areas where we as parents can remove shame when it comes to children and their bodies, or even when it comes to our own bodies and how we model that for children?
I was just thinking about boundaries when we were talking earlier about how children touch themselves. And one of the things I've noticed working with parents is that parents will ask me questions about, here's one. My 5-year-old is coming up and touching my breasts, and I don't like it anymore. I want my space. How do I talk to her about that without shaming her? And so here is an opportunity to realize that the work we need to do is for ourselves, which is like, somewhere along the line, a lot of us will have developed this story that if we put a boundary in place around our own body with our child, that we will somehow teach them shame, like they're ashamed of themselves because they've been touching us. But that's not actually the case, because we can set boundaries in place that are very clear and very non-shaming, which can be like, my child comes up and touches my breast or whatever, and I say, do you know what I've realized? I would like to keep my breast to myself. So when you come up and you want to touch me, would you like to touch my face or would you like to touch my hands or something like this? There's no shame in that. It's like, we all have the right and the responsibility actually to stand up for our own boundaries, particularly around our body, because that models to our child what it feels like when someone is saying, that doesn't feel good to me, but this feels good, right? So our child gets used to this negotiating what their need is when it comes into contact with someone who has a different need. And you can hear in the language that I'm using that that is one of those key building blocks to create a consensual household and teach our child what consent is just by everyday life. Oftentimes when we're talking about consent, parents often think, oh, I need to teach my child how to say, no, that doesn't suit me. But equally, we need to teach our child to listen to someone else saying, that doesn't suit me, no, please stop. So consent has a number of different building blocks, and that is one of the big things, being able to talk about our own boundaries and consent without feeling like we are shaming our child.
Yes, I could not agree more. And I would say that the example that you've used is really going to resonate with a lot of our followers and listeners, because a lot of them are mothers who have chosen to breastfeed as well. So maybe their breast had a different function when they were breastfeeding versus now that they want to have them back for their own body and for their own use, and maybe not have them be enjoyed as a sensory experience for their children anymore. And it's okay to change the rules or set new boundaries or, create a different story around their body and how it should be used now.
Yeah.
So I really love that so much.
And I'm just thinking, if the roles were reversed, right? And this is an interesting sort of thought experiment to do when we're feeling a bit worried about our own, how do we talk about our own boundaries? If the roles were reversed and it was we wanted our child to speak up about this particular boundary, what would we hope for them? What would we hope the skills they had would be? And most of us, if we are raising a child that is going to have breasts in the future, we would love it if that child was able to say, I don't want you to touch my breast, please, but I would love you to hold my hand. Like, wouldn't that be awesome?
Yes. It would be just, it's something that will carry them throughout serve them throughout their lives. And it's just so powerful. This is why these conversations are so powerful. Let's shift gears a little bit and let's speak about, I know that recently you were doing like a 3-day stint in a national school to do sex education. And this was like 11 and 12-year-olds, was it? Yes.
That's right.
So how is the education that you're delivering perhaps different than what we would have experienced growing up?
Yeah. Now, excuse me, I just need to cough. Hang on. Do you know, the secondary school that I went through when my parents were missionaries, we had just one class of like sex ed. It wasn't actually sex ed for us. It was period ed. So we went and went to the school nurse. The girls went out and the boys stayed in the classroom, and we learned how to manage a period. I do vaguely remember her showing us where the emergency pads were if we got our period at school. And we would have been 11, I think, at this stage. And I remember so clearly coming back into our classroom, and on the blackboard was a picture of a uterus, and the shame. I just remember the feeling of shame coming out, like, oh my goodness, they learnt about the uterus. Oh, that's so embarrassing since I have a uterus, that sort of thing. So the way I do it now is everyone stays in the classroom together. I follow the Irish curriculum, which is at the moment behind what international recommendations are for what children 11 and 12 can learn. But until that is updated, schools ask me to stick to that. So, but we do a reasonable amount. We do puberty education, which is all about like, how is your body going to change, whether it's physically or mentally? How are bodies similar, and how are they different depending on their biological sex? We talk about how everybody does it at different stages, and that's okay. And then we go into genital anatomy. So we spend a good amount of time looking at diagrams of vulvas and penises, and highlighting internal structures and talking about eggs and sperm production, and what happens, how do you have to fertilize an egg, and what are some of the ways that sperms get to eggs, and we talk about intercourse. Now, in the Irish curriculum, you're only allowed to, inside the school system, talk about sperms and eggs getting together through a penis and vagina sex, sex between a man and a woman. So obviously that is incredibly unhelpful in terms of giving children information that allows them to grow up who they are. But the way I do it is I just use gender neutral pronouns pretty much for the whole thing. I say two people when we share our genitals, and there's sort of vocal tricks that you can use to stick to the curriculum and at the same time make it pretty clear to anyone who is wondering that, you know, maybe they don't want to share their genitals with someone who has different genitals to them. They want it to be the same, that there is space in the information and the way it's spoken about to allow that to be there and to be comfortable for them. So while the curriculum is better than what I had, there is still a long way to go. And that's why actually my work supporting parents is crucial, particularly for those of us living in Ireland, because the system at this point in time is not supporting us to the best of its ability. It's leaving the lion's share of these conversations for us to have at home.
Yes, and I was actually going to ask if gender identity came up in the education that you offer, but are you not able to speak about that perspective, or?
No, it's outside the curriculum. We don't have a lot of time to do it. So occasionally a child will ask questions. So actually last week there was a question about gender. And so I said, well, we're talking about biology and our sex to do with what our DNA tells our body to do. Gender is rules about what we're meant to look like based on the genitals we have. And of course, there's a lot of rules that are absolutely wrong. And I leave it at that because I have usually about 4 hours with a group of 28 or 29, 11 and 12-year-olds. You can only do so much, right? But as long as I'm not creating any harm. And that's why the language around it is so important, and getting a sense of there is lots to talk about and we're only talking about this small amount. Or sometimes I'll say, you know, the Irish government decides what we're allowed to talk about in schools. There is way more to talk about and lots more interesting things, but we can only talk about this today.
Yes, and we spoke about the most common question among parents. What would you say are some of the most common questions among the children that you are able to deliver this education to?
Again, it's about, am I normal? Like one of them common ones for kids with vulvas would be like, what's that white stuff on my undies? My underwear, sorry, that's an Australian, my pants. And so oftentimes I'll just say that, you know, that's the vagina cleaning itself. And in fact, as part of the service I offer, we do circle time at the end for people with vulvas and people with penises. And so oftentimes that circle with the girls or other people with vulvas would be focused a lot around period management. And even if I have time, like I did last week, able to talk about how our vulva or our vagina can actually talk to us. It communicates with us based on the sort of the fluid or the secretions that are coming out of it. And I actually talked a little bit about how sometimes we can tell whether our body is ovulating or not based on what we notice our vulva is like and what the fluid is like on that. And we talked a little bit about, you know, like looking at the secretions and having a look at them on the toilet paper, and are they stringy or are they not? And so it's really wonderful to be able to give young children insights into how they can start treating their body, like look at it with interest and sort of with a scientist mindset to see, well, what's my body doing? Let's see if I can work it out.
Absolutely. And I did not learn those things until I was struggling to conceive and really had to start paying attention to my body and seeing what it was telling me. And I was blown away by all that actually happens and how we can become so much more attuned to that. So I'm glad that you're able to have those conversations. I know you mentioned that buying a book is just simply not good enough. Can you speak to us around that? Like why giving our child a book around puberty or sex is not simply enough?
Yeah, I did a podcast episode about that the other week. I think the reason why it's important to talk about that is oftentimes many of us will have been given a book in our past, and it replaced a conversation. Or maybe it was, here's a book, come back and let me know if you have any questions. The difficulty with that is what other aspect of parenting do we educate our child with a book? We say, oh, you want to know about why the sky is blue? Here is a book. Come back and ask me if you have any questions. Or you want to know why dog's hair falls out and why we're having to quit? Well, here's a book. Come back and ask me any questions. Like, we don't do that, right? And so in all the other topics that we actually answer our child's question, we are actively displaying to them that we talk about dog hair, and we talk about science about sky, and we talk about food, and we talk about feeling sad, or we talk about when somebody dies, or whatever that is. And yet in this part, oh, we don't talk about it, we give a book. So it's more along the lines of, how do we set up the culture of connection, and how do we give our child permission to talk to us by being the first person to talk in our family? Because it goes along with that, we don't actually wait till our child asks questions, that we are the adult. We're in charge of keeping our child safe and healthy. Like, we don't wait for them to ask to be taught how to swim because we know it's important. So we start teaching them that. We don't wait for them to ask us to put on their seatbelt because we know it's super important. So we do that for them. In the same way, we don't wait for our child to ask what sex is, or how babies are made, or, you know, am I allowed to touch my body, or anything like that, because we know how important it is to keep our child safe. And so when we step up to the mark as the adults in our family, and we model what starting a conversation about these things look like, our child gets implicit permission to do the same. And a book can never do that. They can be a support to us. I mean, in bedtime reading, we would read sort of about the sperm race from some of the books I had. And so it was super fun. The kids would choose it and read. And then the sperms go into the vagina, and where are they going now? And oh, they're going to the egg, and here comes the sperms, and who's going to win? Oh, there we go. You know, like, it's all like, it was super fun. But so it just becomes part of everyday life. But the conversations are the important part for giving our child permission to come to us with anything.
And I know that you offer that that guidance for parents when it comes to these topics with their children. I'm wondering, do you also offer guidance to parents who maybe have a child with Down syndrome, or maybe they have a child that's in a wheelchair, or maybe they have a child that is in some way different than maybe your standard, you know, kids that you're teaching in the national school? Like, maybe they just have something else, whether it's intellectually or physically different. Do you speak to parents around those areas?
So the way I work, every child of every ability has a sexual self. Every single child has a sexual self. What their ability to learn is, or what physical abilities they have to access their body, just presents another layer of, well, okay, so how do we present the information in a different way, or how do we present the information at a different time? So while the Evolve School, which is my main method of teaching parents, that like the whole system to do this, is not specifically focused on children with additional needs, that the principles can be used for children of all abilities, because a lot of what we teach in the Evolve School is, how do we get comfortable with these topics, and how do we sort of look at our own shame and our own habits around not talking, and how do we sort of find our assumptions about a child with additional needs, and what are our beliefs maybe that we haven't questioned to do with their sexual self, and how can, by changing those assumptions, can we start being more open at home? And I would say that most of the time, children with additional needs are the ones that need their parents to step up to the mark even more, because it's terrible to say, but they can be more vulnerable. And so they need a protector and a guide and a supporter for the developing parts that are to do with their sexuality. So to answer the question very clearly, it's not specifically designed to that for families with those specific experiences, but what a parent learns going through the process is absolutely relevant.
I love that, because I feel like so often children, you know, whether, like I said, it's something physically different or if it's intellectually different, society has often just thought they are completely closed off to having sexual experiences, but that's just not the case. And so I'm happy to hear that you're able to support parents, or they're able to apply the lessons from the Evolve School to these different areas. And I remember you speaking about the different pillars that you teach through the Evolve School. So can you just touch on those briefly as well?
Yeah, sure. So there are three pillars in the Evolve School: kindness, courage, and growth. And each of those pillars focus on a particular skill set or a particular set of knowledge that we need to give our child the full experience of being connected with us, having accurate information, and learning the skills that they need to sort of grow into their sexual self. So the kindness pillar would be very much looking at what our needs are as caring adults, like all that shame and fear. How do we look after ourselves in a way that we have enough wherewithal and enough kindness in ourselves that we can go and have these conversations with our children without feeling like I have to do this, that really harsh sort of pushing. So that's the kindness pillar. The growth pillar is around all the different sorts of age appropriate topics of conversation that you can have with children of all ages. And it's teaching that layering approach that I talked about earlier, that we have conversations when our children are really, really young about very basic principles like bodily autonomy, and our body feels nice to touch, and our body is our own, and that's what the genitals are called, which all those foundations then allow us later on, maybe when they're 9, to have a deeper conversation about consent. Now, we are having conversations about everything all the way up, but the growth pillar really drills down and gets clear on what are those things we can be talking about early, because as a general rule, parents will be sort of less inclined to start conversations when children are young, purely based on how we were raised, right? So that's the growth pillar. And then the last one is the courage pillar, which is all strategies about how to speak up, take those steps, because a lot of the questions I get is, okay, I know that it's important to talk about genitals or whatever it is with my 3-year-old or 2-year-old, but I really don't know what words to say, and I don't know how to start a conversation when I haven't started at all, right? And so the courage pillar is all about the specific ways to speak up, the words we can use, the courage to look at our child and accept them for absolutely who they are, whether they're touching their genitals or not touching their genitals, or they ask us some embarrassing question in the supermarket while we're waiting to buy our minced meat and our sweet potatoes, So that courage pillar is all about the doing. And courage is, I actually love the name of it, because I really do feel like it's like, every other part of parenting too, which is stepping up to the mark and going, I have no idea how to do this, but I am so going to learn because I love my kids so much and I want to do my absolute best for them.
Oh, I could feel the energy of you saying that from here. I love that so, so, so much. And I love that that's how you help to build this strong foundation for parents to go forth and have these conversations, because hopefully these will not be the last time we have connected conversations with our children. Hopefully it just deepens the connection so that they can come to us about other subject areas as well, all throughout their lives. Curious to know, you mentioned having teenage children yourself. So what are some of maybe the most challenging conversation or topics that you've had to navigate with them, and how did you navigate those?
Having teenagers is, so I would imagine most of your listeners are still at the younger age of sort of parenting. Oftentimes, and I remember doing this for myself when my children were younger, teenagers looked scary. They would be cycling around in sort of what looked like gangs with their hoodies up, or they'd be loud and playing loud music, or they would talk loudly on the footpath. And it was sort of like, oh, I just always felt scared. And there's one day when I realized my kids are going to grow up to be those types of people. And so instead of saying, and I would sometimes say, oh, teenagers, just be careful of them. I was like, what the heck am I doing? I shouldn't be saying this. So I started to change the narrative and go, it is going to be so exciting when you start growing into adults and you want to get more independent. this is going to be super exciting for you, and we're here to sort of help you out. But I think it's that thing about the independence they want and how it's developmentally appropriate, age appropriate, completely and utterly reasonable for them to want to spend time with their friends, for them to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend or another special friend, for them to want to kiss someone in the lane after school. Like all those things, it was fine for them. They were having a reasonable time. It was me. I was sort of like going, how do I sort of appreciate that this is just another developmental stage? Now I'm well into it now, and it's fine. And it's sort of, I've really been working on the rejoicing of new milestones, purely because in our media, oftentimes teens get a really crappy rap. We're talking about consent violations or sexually transmitted infections or teen pregnancies or, whatever that is. And those are the stories we hear. And we don't often hear a lot of the fabulous stories that you will get as a parent when you start realizing actually teens are awesome. They're amazing problem solvers. They are great at collaborating if you have a problem in the household and you're trying to work out a solution that fits for everyone. And there's just that sense of it's not as bad as we think it's going to be. And we need to sort of reprogram ourselves. And I guess, again, that's the nervous system, again, has been programmed by the media that we've listened to and the descriptions of teenagers that we have internalized and how we've considered them to be dangerous. So it's reframing this idea of actually teen independence is so important, because if they didn't have that, then they're stunted essentially. And like, how do they get to be an adult? The whole point is to get them to adulthood. So that's probably been the most challenging thing, taking that independence from something that feels like scary to something to be celebrated.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Are there any areas that we haven't spoken about that you feel is really important to cover?
I think, I suppose it's a reminder, really. We touched on this before, but just a reminder that I talk very much about everything that is possible. That doesn't mean that just because you've heard me say it, that it's going to be easy to do at home, right? So that's where that kindness pillar comes in again. And to be kind to ourselves and say, okay, this is a work in progress. Just like our child doesn't learn to walk just like that. As a parent, we don't learn to speak about sensitive things just like that. And that sometimes the kind thing is to appreciate and realize that we need additional help. And it's absolutely okay to do that. So to reach out and find resources from someone who shares your values, because not all resources online are the same. And you may have particular values inside your family that are central to how you're raising a family. But maybe the person that's providing sex education has different values. And so it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like a good match. So to be kind, you're not broken, you're not wrong. You just need to find the support and information that works for your family the best.
If someone were to want to work with you, Sarah, how would they go about doing that? Or what are the different means or methods that they can avail of your specialized skills and knowledge?
Sure. The Evolve School is one of the main ways people work with me, and that opens twice a year. So I'm currently in the Evolve School at the moment with a group of parents, and so you can go onto the wait list for that. But my Instagram account is where I put a lot of effort into that. And the idea about that is a space online where you can go and feel like you're not on your own, and you can get support. I have a podcast called Sitting in a Car that comes out every week. And it's a 7 or 8 minute, generally not much longer than that, where I answer one question from a real parent talking about something thorny or tricky in their family. And so I suppose by listening to Sitting in a Car each week, you can start to reprogram your nervous system. A lot of people tell me that it actually does a really good job of that. I do one-on-one consultation too. My website is sarahsproule.com, and there's a form you can fill in to find out more about those things. But reach out to me in Instagram DMs. I think Instagram is a happy place, and I try and make my part of it happy too.
I've really enjoyed your post, and I love sitting in a car. It's great to have you actually in video format explaining things to parents and giving them different perspectives to consider. So for anyone who wants to go have a look at your Instagram page, where can they find you?
I am Sarah Sproule on Instagram. So it's easy just to type that into the search bar.
And this is a question that we always ask at the end of the podcast, and that is, what is the legacy that you would like to leave behind with the work that you're doing?
Oh, such a juicy, wonderful question. I would love, like, if we're talking numbers, in a few years to have 1,000 families to be more connected to their growing children, so that those children feel supported and loved and cared for in all parts of their developing self, which is also about their sexuality, and that those kids have the relationship skills and the accurate information needed to feel confident, comfortable in their body, respectful of who they are as a person, and they're respectful of the differences in the people around them.
That is such a beautiful legacy to leave behind and to be working towards. And I have every faith that that is what you will achieve, because you are a beautiful soul doing amazing, needed work. And I just thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for the time that you've spent with us. So thank you.
Thanks, Ariana.
We hope you've enjoyed the show. Please feel free to leave a comment or a review to let us know what you loved about this episode and others like it. And if you'd like to be featured on our show, or if you know of someone who would be an amazing guest, get in touch with us at info@wellfedphotography.com and mention Living a Life Well Fed in the subject line.